Hello. Thank you for choosing News Central. My name is Felicity Ezewike. So in an ideal world, we probably wouldn't be so concerned. But the world is far from ideal, and the U.S. does wield real influence. So yeah, it is something when it issues a travel ban. And here on One Slot, we try to provide you robust views to not just expand our collective understanding of the issues, but towards making the right decisions for us. The Trump administration's ban prohibiting travel to the U.S. from a dozen countries and restricting travel from 7 others, citing inadequate screening and vetting processes which hinder America's ability to identify potential security threats before entry, has not been received with any cheers. The ban was imposed on 12 countries. 7 of them are in Africa. It comes amid rising tensions over the president's escalating campaign of immigration enforcement. But it arrived with no immediate signs of the chaos that unfolded at airports across the U.S. during Trump's first travel ban back in 2017. In this case, there has been reactions. While Chad's president, Mohamed Idris Deby Itno, has instructed his country to act in accordance with the principles of reciprocity and suspend the issuance of visas to U.S. citizens, the African Union, AU, respectfully has urged the U.S. administration to consider adopting a more consultative approach to engage in dialogue with affected countries. They're also calling for transparent communication and, where necessary, they asked for collaborative efforts to address any underlying concerns behind the travel ban decision. They also acknowledge every nation's sovereign right to border protection and security. It, however, said it is concerned over potential negative impact on people-to-people ties, educational exchange, trade, and the broader diplomatic relations that have been carefully nurtured over decades. Now, to discuss this matter and pertinent questions we should be asking with this travel ban, I have a couple of guests with me. Grace Anuforo is the director, Bethany Elementary School, joins us from Ogun State. We also have Liesl Louw-Vaudran, Senior Advisor, African Union. She joins us from Johannesburg, South Africa. Also joining in is Dr Thelela Ngcetane-Vika. She is a lecturer with School of Governance, Johannesburg, also in South Africa. Thank you very much for joining us in this conversation. Okay, before I start asking my guests question, we need to deviate a bit and bring you updates on a situation currently in Ogudu-Ifako Link Bridge, if I get that right. Let me see if I have that information. Yes. We have a correspondent on the ground. For our traffic users, it's a close of work period, so there will be people who might want to use that route. I think that's important information for those that are using that access to go home or head out to work for nocturnal staff like us. Thank you very much, Omolola. All right, let's get back to our conversation. My guests are on standby. I will start with Dr. Thelela. Thank you very much again for joining us. I mean, granted, the chaos from 2017 has been avoided, but I beg your pardon? Okay, I thought I was being spoken to. We've had the, can you hear me, please? Okay. Granted that the chaos from 2017 has been avoided, but the intention still remains. What's different this time?
It's a good evening from where I am, and I guess good afternoon in other parts of the continent. Well, maybe the first two things we need to put on the table on the matter of the travel bans. The first one is that the Trump administration, whether is it the first administration or Trump 2.0 as the current administration, is consistent on one thing, on American first policy. In other words, a more nationalist, a more protectionist policy. And it takes many forms, whether those forms are going to be tariffs, whether those forms are going to be a travel ban on selected countries, or, you know, what we saw with the president of South Africa in the White House. So that's the first thing that we need to understand, that the Trump administration is looking after the interests, and especially those that it campaigned on during the U.S. elections, at least building up to the elections. And immigration was one of those. And Trump continuously has got this thing that he says all the time, that borders are opened and people are coming willy-nilly. And then the second point is the response of the African Union, which is quite important, because in a nutshell, what the African Union is saying, give some evidence. If there's a basis for, the proclamation by the U.S., give evidence. Is there a reason that particular countries are banned and others are not? And it doesn't seem to be clear, at least from on the surface of it. And as one tries to listen to what the president of the United States is saying, but even with that, there is a conviction that he's going to be taking that route. Remember the story of the wall, the Mexican wall that was going to be built? So he makes promises on the campaign, and he keeps them in ways that sometimes are inconsistent really with the multilateral system within the international order. So I wanted just to put those up front.
Right, Liesl, let me come to you. I will get to talk to you more about the AU's reaction, but first, I'd like you to paint us a picture of the implications of this ban and why it matters for Africa.
Yes, good evening. Certainly, it matters for tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of citizens who regularly travel to the US. But I think this is not something completely new, especially for some of the countries that are on the travel ban. Those 12 countries, countries like Libya and Somalia and so on, were previously targeted, but they also, one has to be realistic. Citizens have struggled even getting into the European Union countries. So it's not, I think, for them a completely new situation. And as you mentioned, in 2017, there was that earlier ban against some of those countries. Countries have been included. But I think first, it's, again, just like with the aid cuts, very abrupt. So, no time for preparation for those who are planning to travel to the US. And then that links with the African Union statement, is the issue of, on what basis, because the accusation, I think, against some countries is that they don't properly vet citizens before they travel, that some of their paperwork isn't in order, and that maybe some of there's corruption when issuing visas, etc. So those are things that I think the African Union and governments themselves, African governments, are looking into and wanting to respond to try and understand if there's a pattern there. And also, there seems to be a sense that some of this can be, I don't want to say negotiated, like a tariff, but if there can be some kind of dialogue or negotiations around why a certain country, countries like, for example, I don't know, the Republic of Congo, that's probably the first time their citizens have been on this list, and, it's difficult to understand. So I think the sense is that there might be able to be some kind of discussion around why some countries and why others not. But it is certainly for citizens who travel to the United States, students studying, people wanting to rejoin their family members, you know, it's devastating for refugees. I mean, one country on this list, Sudan, is the country globally today with the world's worst humanitarian crisis. People are, fleeing wars. So especially for a country like Sudan, this is really, really something that would be devastating to those who had hoped perhaps to travel to the US.
Yes, so many implications. Let me come to you, Grace. You are in the academia, so you're quite familiar with the quest for education in the U.S. Talk to us your understanding of how this will impact not just family reunifications for those who have families there and they want to go or they want to come, but for student exchanges and professional collaborations between the U.S. and Africa.
Yes. Okay. So based on the academia, like you said, there's going to be a problem in the educational exchange aspect in that African students would face barriers to learning. When they face scrutiny, when African students face scrutiny, heightened scrutiny, that's what I mean by that, visa rejections, and even if their countries were not directly banned, there is a little bit of, people get affected. Now, there's also the part where we have, as a result, we're going to be having a reduced African enrollment in US universities, as well as a brain drain or a brain block, where these policies block educational exchange temporarily, like you said earlier, and this is what a lot of African nationals use these exchange programs to build their skills and knowledge, so they can bring it back to their countries to transfer this knowledge to their countries and see how they can bring more change, positive changes to the academic environment. Now, but when this gets affected, we have a brain drain. So there's a reduced knowledge, what I call it migration, from the US into their African countries. Yes, so it definitely would affect the academia. Thank you.
Dr. Thelela, thanks. Can the ban be considered a violation of international human rights law? Dr. Thelela, if you can hear me. Okay, can the ban be considered a violation of international human rights law?
Well, that's very, very difficult to determine because international law, by its nature, it's complicated. First, you look at the sovereignty of the country and what are the rules, and what would probably President Trump will argue, and he is currently arguing, is that the issues with the vetting process, which be argued, because I mean, if you are to apply for a US visa, you go to a visa consulate, a United States visa consulate, so they do the vetting. So, it's a debatable thing. So if you are saying, is he violating international order, it's a very arbitrary question, because in what form? He's going to argue sovereignty. And there's always that contestation in international law of the sovereignty of a state, which always comes before. Of course, we're living in a more connected, global order. Are we able to, that by biblical saying that loving our neighbor as we're loving ourselves? And is there evidence why are the travel bans to some countries and not? So those are the kind of issues that are really muddy and arbitrary and vague to deal with, because there isn't any substantiveness that you're hearing that this is what would have happened, or these particular people from this country have done A, B, C, D. This is why we are here. You're just hearing a very blanket statement, if you like.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, but I crawled on social media before coming on here, so some of my questions carved out of questions that people are asking and claims that some people are making, that this is a violation of international law, but they needed to hear from someone who really knows about these things. Liesl, let me come to you and ask about the U.S. Claims. The first thing they said was, among the things they said was, Chad has the most violations of its immigration rules, disrespecting them as a result. But the country, Chad, its response to the ban is defiant. They're seizing all issuance of visas to U.S. citizens. Talk to us about the President of Chad's approach in contrast to the AU's reconciliatory dialogue, reconsideration approach.
I mean, just on that issue of, violation of citizens overstaying their visa rights, I saw some of the statistics. A country like Chad certainly is by far the country with the highest rate, because they only had a couple of hundred people having visas to the US, and so almost half of them, I think it was something like 400 or so, overstayed their visa. So proportionally, if you look at, so Chad is the biggest violator, but there could be thousands of citizens from another country who overstay their visas, But in any effect, that's on that basis also that Chad was excluded. I think the reaction from President Mahamat from Chad. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go ahead. Sorry, I interjected.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I think what was interesting, because he said, well, reciprocity, Americans then can't travel to Chad. I think one should bear in mind the context in which this is happening. So Chad, being in the central Sahel, bordering the 3 other countries that have very recently also almost expelled, but at least French military, US military has left those countries. US military also was asked to leave Chad. So very sort of difficult, tense relationship between Chad and the US in any event, even before this ban. And so within that context, I think we should see that reaction, whereas others, as you say, the African Union and other governments have either kept quiet or are hoping for dialogue. But I think because of the political situation and the already tense relations between Chad and the US, it was almost a populist move of the president then to say, well, in that case, US citizens can't travel to Chad either.
Liesl, I want to stay with you and just ask that the advocacy for dialogue, collaborative approach that the AU is, pushing, will it work when it is obvious that this has been in the works for a while? The Trump administration have given careful thoughts to what they wanted to achieve with this ban. So this approach by the AU, while diplomatically a lot of persons have applauded it, it's saying that we're putting our head in the sand.
The fact that the African Union actually made a statement and expressed its concern, about the impact of this on people-to-people relations, as I said, is already, I think, something that people would applaud, because you have to remember the African Union, it's an intergovernmental organization. It doesn't really have a mandate to speak on behalf of its 55 members, and who are also sovereign states and deal with their own foreign policy on their own. So the African Union can't actually, it doesn't have the power or the right really to speak on behalf of all the countries. So I think it's careful. And it's true, as you say, this call for dialogue and evidence-based approach might not work, but it has spoken out saying it is concerned and calling for, collaboration to address these issues. I think we can't expect more from the African Union unless, it has a mandate. There are many instances in the past, like, for example, when the Ukraine war started, the chairperson of the African Union Commission made a statement, and then very quickly other states said, well, there's no way you can make a statement saying this, is against international law, so the organization actually has burnt its fingers in the past by speaking too strongly on certain issues, which it really doesn't have a mandate to do.
Liesl, I do get what you're saying, but again, let me come to Dr. Thelela and just, I want you to speak on saying issue. Does it bother you that when we talk of a body like AU, it seems the power is not there to actually act? It seems more of a talk shop than actually being able to impact any meaningful change. Yet, it continues to speak on issues like this. I'd like your thoughts.
And to agree with the previous panelist, you must remember the African Union has got its own challenges. It's not more structured like the European Union. So fundamentally, it's difficult for the AU to speak, as she said, for the 55 member states. Unlike within the EU, they agree on how they go about. So if there's a matter on tariffs, the EU would speak in one voice, and that one voice will hold. Even during the COVID pandemic, when they were dealing with the vaccine, they would be able to speak in one voice. It's very difficult for the EU to do that. At the very least that it can do, it can ask for dialogue between the affected countries with the United States. What other option? But this, it really goes back to the core issues of Africa must really redefine itself within the broader geopolitics and global order, because we're sitting with this because of the shift in geopolitics, and it does look like there's going to be continuity in that shift, and Africa is continuously going to find itself, or at least herself, in various forms, whether is it immigration, whether is it tariffs, but still with all the richness in mineral resources. But because we're very fragmented on trade, we're fragmented on politics, we're even fragmented in our 4 blocks. We don't agree much all the time. I mean, you can witness this even within the United Nations Security Council, how much we really don't agree. So it talks to a fundamental problem, to the very foundational structures of the AU, and maybe it's a conversations that our heads of state and all those must continuously engage. How do we strengthen the AU to be a really effective body? And it will require Africans willing to really work together, amongst other things.
So much work needed to be done on this continent. But, I mean, some people are optimistic, while some people are more pessimistic as to, where we're going at the end of the day. We're going to a short break, and when we come back, we'll flip this conversation on its head and look at possibly the opportunities that comes off this U.S. ban. Stay with us. Very glad you're still with us. It gives me an impression that you really are into the conversation like I am. So I still have my guests with us, and we're looking at the U.S. travel ban that has affected 7 African countries. I'll go to Grace now, but I also want Liesl's thought on this as well. And the question is, Grace, starting off, can the travel ban lead to a brain drain reversal where perhaps African talent that would have gone to the US is redirected to other countries or stay in Africa?
This brings me back to when the COVID-19 issue came up some years ago, 2020, 2019. I remember vividly that this was the period that a lot of people embraced technology. You know, lots of people knew about Zoom. We had lots of virtual meetings and all that. So I feel like in a situation where there's a problem, people begin to think about solutions towards maybe some sort of another method. So you like the question you asked now, yes, I believe that there can be a reversal. So where we can have the aspect of developing local talent, we can think about, okay, how can we actually begin to invest or begin to develop our talents in the educational system? I mean, and there's the remote learning. We can also take advantage of remote learning, where instead of, since you can't travel there, you can actually do these things online, and then you bring it back to your country. So you do what you have to do, right? And you find that people begin to develop. There's a development, there's an internal development, yes. There's some sort of internal development in that space where, okay, we don't have any other choice. Is there a way we can develop our own talent, our own resources, and our own whatever it takes to ensure that what they are doing over there, we can actually do it here in another way? Yes, it's very possible.
All right, Liesl, your thoughts, please.
I think there's been progressively a sense, you know, that the US, but even Europe, as I said earlier, it's becoming more and more difficult for people to travel, to study, to work. So, I mean, in certain circumstances, we still see people, you know, desperately economic migrants moving from one country to the other, but it could be, I think, this specific travel ban also would increase that sense amongst not only people in the affected countries, but more broadly, you know, African elites also, people saying, well, I'm not going to travel or go to a conference or even sports events or so on, you know, and that much of that, you know, there could be a positive spin-off in the sense that more events then, you know, instead of having your big conference in the US would then happen back home. But this issue of not feeling welcomed in Western countries, I think specifically, it's nothing really new.
All right, Dr. Thelela, let me ask you this. The travel ban, is it possible for us to use it as a fuel for the continent's development? Like, do you think it could possibly force us to invest in our own potential? I mean, we talk about Africa's potential so much that it's pretty tiring sometimes, but it is the obvious truth. We are full of potential and talent, but can we use this for us other than, you know, going out to the world and improving other places?
That's a very, very important question, but that question is equally very nuanced to answer it, because one part of the answering that question are developmental challenges within the continent. And amongst those developmental challenges, the difficulty that African countries can do trade amongst themselves. I mean, if you're looking, for instance, at the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which should be a catalyst for really a robust economic trade between African countries. We're still at early phases. But then there's a second point that our education systems sometimes in our countries, given issues of corruption, poor governance, and the list is endless, that they don't necessarily rise to meet the levels that our young children and the younger generation should be benefiting from. So when you take away the opportunities for them to study in other parts of the world, doesn't matter where, then you're also taking away the ability to create knowledge, which should be an exchange, whether it's happening here at home, in the continent, happening maybe in Asia Pacific. But also there are opportunities that whilst you're having a Trump administration, maybe some hostility around issues of the travel ban, it also opens for that multipolar world that maybe the BRICS countries can then begin to fast track if there are any, I don't know, educational opportunities, because I would still want us to encourage, yes, our younger Africans to stay in the continent, innovate, develop, do things, but also they must also expand and be wherever they want to be, and come back then to do exactly what you're asking, maybe develop the continent. But we need it. It's not like one or the other. We need all of it. We're living in a global world. People are marrying each other. People are studying everywhere. And when you cut that, I mean, it's just not.
No. So my question does not. I agree. Again, I agree with you. But my question does not. We cannot live in isolation. It's impossible. But I'm looking at a situation where we look at this ban as an opportunity other than a barrier, as most people are thinking perhaps it is. There's one thing I haven't asked, and that is your view of this ban. Do you see it more as a barrier or an opportunity? I think that should have been a basis before I jump on the question that I asked now.
Yes, but remember, to answer that question, you need an Africa that's functional, governments in Africa to be functional, education systems.
Well, Doctor, there is one argument I always try. It seems naive, but America and all those countries that we admire so much, they put in the work. They had to do introspection for them to grow to become where they are at now. I'm not saying we should cut out travel and all of that, but I'm saying, is it not possible for us to leadership? It won't happen overnight, but don't we have the ability to do introspection and change our own future?
We do, but we also need political will. So when we answer that question, we must answer it in many aspects of it. The will, I believe, all of us as Africans, at least to a larger extent, we have it. But we also need our leaders who've got powers and access to certain levers of power to do what they ought to do, to deliver on the mandates they promised Africans in the various countries. We know there's a problem there. But also at a very basic level, Africans are doing a lot of work. I mean, I see when I travel a lot of work that's being done, people trying to develop themselves, but then you've got issues of limitations to resources, or the current resources are being abused. So it can be a 1+1 answer. It's an answer that needs a sort of a nuanced approach to it. But to answer it directly, it can be a catalyst, but the question is, how are Africans going to use it as a catalyst to change the current trajectory that we're finding ourselves in? I think for me, that's the question that we need to answer.
I mean, this is beautiful. That's the whole point of one slot, to put out the argument and hear your views on them, and perhaps the person watching will be better equipped to make decisions and look at this issue in a different light. Let me come to you, Liesl, and ask this same question that I was supposed to have asked from the beginning. Do you see this travel ban as an opportunity or a barrier, or how do you think Africans should be looking at it?
With the professor that I think there would be a lot of turning towards other BRICS countries, South America, China, other Asian countries, because you can't prevent people from moving, seeking opportunities, studying. We are in this interconnected world. So I think for those who are able to study abroad and to travel, will then say, well, I actually have many other options. Obviously, Africa's development and Africa's future, that's the utmost priority. And I think, unfortunately, we do have crises and conflicts, as I said, in places like Sudan and elsewhere on the continent, that we need political will to get mediation going, to get other African leaders, to help to get peace talks going, because without that security, people also can't thrive. So that is definitely something Africans and the African Union and African governments can do something about.
You work closely with the AU, and on this program we've talked a lot about the capacity and the potential that the AU has. In cases like this, how do you think the AU can be strengthened so that when we have conversations like this, they could provide guidelines for countries to, if it is to seek dialogue, that is the goal, to initiate that process? Will there ever be a time when the AU can take the lead beyond issuing statements?
Yes, well, first of all, governments and the member states of the African Union should pay their dues, should pay more than what they currently do, which is about 1/3 of the budget of the African Union. The rest comes from development partners, mostly the European Union and so on, which really, that in itself is something that is embarrassing for people who work at the African Union and so on. And so there should be the self-financing of the African Union, and the African Union itself, even without that, and even with the current, as I said earlier, with a very weak, it's an intergovernmental organization like the UN. It is not the European Union. States haven't ceded any sovereignty to the AU. But even with this situation, I think the AU should be more ambitious itself, the Commission in Addis Ababa, to represent the continent, on the world stage. So it is also up to those officials in Addis to be perhaps a bit more confident.
Doctor,
it's up to the member states,
Okay.
Yeah.
Doctor, I'm going to ask you the same question. I'm curious as to your thinking here. What is the conversation about the AU in the academia? Dr. Thelela.
Oh, yes. Sorry, I missed that. Oh, well, she summed it up very, very well, especially the part that the bulk of the funding comes from, especially the European side, is problematic, because if you want self-determination, which is the question that we are asking fundamentally, the AU, can it have the teeth that it deserves or it needs to have? But if you're still depending on others to fund you, that teeth becomes really problematic to bite. So hence I was saying initially, we really need to go to the drawing board. First, the conversations in academia, even when you're looking at security issues within the continent, you're looking at issues of xenophobia that often South Africa finds itself in a difficult situation. Issues within the Sudan, the DRC that we've been dealing with recently, the Horn of Africa. But when you look at all these issues collectively, they tell you that the African Union, especially the past few years, I don't know, there seems to be some but not a strength in terms of direction, if I may put it, and I'm trying to be kind here. There is something that's sort of missing. And until we get that right, we're going to be finding ourselves here. But then it goes back to the fragmentation within the continent. So you have an African Union that it cannot make certain decisions because even the very sub-regions are fragmented, there are dynamics, there are politics. And then it becomes a very perpetual a cycle that doesn't seem to end. But we can't give up to cynicism as Africans. And that's what one of the submissions I often make, that we must really, really try hard. And perhaps the Trump era administration is giving us is an impetus for Africans to do what they should do for Africa. Some are even saying on social media, maybe it's making for all of us to stay at home than travel to all these countries. I mean, it's a joke, but maybe there's a point behind that. Invest at home, do what we need to do here at home, and maybe over time we can overcome some of the challenges.
I have to believe that, and I'm hoping it will be in our lifetime. We'll see some of these changes happening. Grace, let me talk to you about, opportunities for development of our own educational institution, research centers, ways we can reduce reliance on external partners like the US, in this case, because of the ban.
Well, yes, there are many ways we can reduce reliance. So recently, I think I was reading, I don't remember the article it was, but I realized that in contrast to China's increasing engagement on the continent, there's the US diplomatic credibility in Africa weakening. So I would say that where there's a problem, there is always an opportunity. So now that we have seen that, this is probably not going to be working anytime soon, or this is not working, what can we do? How do we go about inculcating alternative solutions? So I would come from the angle of remote cross-cultural experiences on students. For example, I know a school that it's a primary and secondary school. So I know this school that the kids have never been to, I wouldn't mention the country, have never been to that country, but they're speaking the language of that country, and they already know the cultural language, the cultural attitude, and imbibing this cultural attitude within their own space, in their classroom, in how they speak and all that, and they have never stepped into that country. So we can say that, this country doesn't want us to come in anymore and take one or two things from them, study and do this and do that and take it back to our country. That's fine. How about we go through the remote learning aspect, develop more remote learning opportunities, develop more remote learning platforms where people can get what they have to get in these countries that are, in this case, US, and then learn remotely, bring it back here. Also, we've had lots of brilliant professors. We've had lots of brilliant scholars that have done presentations, right, online. So these people, I know someone who is looking at building a platform, some sort of like a learning management system, but not that, right, where people can actually present international presentations, like you're attending an international conference or an academic conference, but you're not there physically. You can do that on this platform. We can develop platforms like that, things like that, and a couple of others off the top of my head that I can list out now, but maybe for time purpose, we might not be able to talk about them. Yeah.
Remote learning, because when we talk about it, it's on the assumption that we have a strong internet penetration. We need strong internet in order for that to be viable. Let's take where we are domiciled, Nigeria. The access to the internet is not as widespread as it should be. In remote areas where they need this more, it is not there. They don't even know how to use it. So the viability of that, some will say, is questionable because it still maintains, opportunity for a group of people while others continue to be in the lack, and education level in this country perhaps will continue to be lopsided, because while one has the opportunity to explore all the learning opportunities that online learning and remote learning provides, there is that demography that don't have that access. So how do we deal with that to ensure inclusivity?
The government can find a way somehow to partner with, there are non-profits, there are private organizations that are doing stuff, great, wonderful educational solutions, developing educational solutions to reach the remote communities without having to use the internet. I know a couple of them that are currently working to reach, hard to reach communities, to give them what they're going to be giving them is what they have learned. I mean, the founders, they have learned in the international education space, what they have learned on the internet, taking it to remote areas. There are so many ways that the government can partner with such people, such individuals, such non-profit organizations, and see how we can take this thing far. So we do not have to use the internet. There's also, I know, I don't remember now, but it was not the internet. It was like a radio learning program. Yes, I think Teach for Nigeria does it. So there's this radio learning program that doesn't require internet. So you take the radio. There was a time they did it during the COVID-19 era. Some radio stations did it. So kids and even adults were learning some of these things via the radio. They didn't have to use the internet, and it was working. So I think that we should leverage more. The government should leverage more on public-private partnerships, non-profit partnerships. Let's see how we can make this happen. We have lots of Nigerians coming to Nigeria now. Lots of Nigerians who are brilliant. Lots of Nigerians who have wonderful initiatives, but they are not getting the visibility. If there can be platforms to get such people visible, let's see how we can tap into their ideas and see how we can take these things that we are learning, those of us who have the chance to learn on the internet, take it to remote areas and see how we can make it happen. Yeah.
Out of time. I wish we had more time, but that's all the time we're permitted. Dr. Thelela, thank you so much for being here. Liesl, thank you for giving us your time. And of course, Grace, we appreciate you being here on one slot. I hope we can get another opportunity to talk about Africa. Maybe not about this ban, but something else more productive. Thank you very much for speaking with us today. Here are my thoughts. So the U.S. travel ban is no doubt a huge upset for a lot of reasons. But instead of seeing it as a barrier, can we consider it an opportunity instead? I did ask my guest about this. Seriously, is it such a terrible idea to reconsider our unhealthy reliance on others to recognize our worth? Why are we consistently at the mercy of others? Granted, there are some crazies amongst us, but which country in the world doesn't have some? Is it the same U.S. issuing ban for security reasons? Don't roll your eyes, please. I truly believe that while keeping relationships are important for collective growth, it is way more important to invest in and grow our much touted potential. For too long, we've relied on the benevolence of others. But the truth is, our worth is not defined by the opinions of others. Our worth is defined by our resilience, our creativity, and our determination. Just look at what we are doing for other countries around the world. Correct me if I'm wrong, but is there a sphere of human endeavor that you will not find an African? We are limitless. All I'm saying is, instead of worrying so much, trying to patch a relationship or seek dialogue with an administration that clearly does not rate much of the world, I have nothing against seeking dialogue. We need each other clearly. I am just saying, we take this for the opportunity it is. Get angry and see it as an opportunity to reimagine our place in the world. America did the work needed to be a world power. Why the heck are we so afraid to even try? Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.